This is going to be the first video in a series of videos about brush control. Welcome to that look you get from your wife when you bring home new hobby stuff. Best thing you can say, you won it in a raffle. In this series of videos, I'm going to explain brush control and how using a brush to your advantage is going to make your painting a lot easier. Don't mind this thing, this is what I'm using to record over here. Now, when it comes to brush control, there is a few things you need to take into mind in order to get the best results. Putting paint on the model is not just about putting paint on the model. It's about putting that paint in the right place. That is going to be done through brush control and techniques I'm going to try to show you in this series of videos. These are some of the brushes that I use for all the work that I produce on my models. I only use a round tip with a sharp pointed end. As you can tell, a few of my brushes, particularly this one, has a slight bend to the tip. Unfortunately, this comes from not looking after the brush as well as you should have, and you can notice that on this brush it has the same kind of damage. I'm going to show you a trick in a future video that makes this damage actually better for your brushing technique. But when you pick a brush, what you're looking for is a nice body with a nice sharp point. Sometimes you need a smaller brush to get into smaller areas. So the first thing I'm going to show you about brush control is actually not going to have anything to do with brushes, because believe it or not, part of brush control comes down to how you use your paint. So when we load our brush, what we want to do is try to load the tip of the brush. You never want to load any more in the brush. If you load the brush like this, for example, loading the brush like this is incorrect. This is too much paint, and this will definitely make your paint look terrible. If you get too much paint on your brush, it's not a problem, you can just wipe it off. The first thing we're going to do is use paint straight out of the bottle. Not all paints behave exactly the same, but this is a good representation of the average acrylic paint. And as you can tell, straight out of the bottle, the paint comes on super saturated. Most times, the paint will have better coverage straight out of the bottle. However, as you can see, I'm struggling to get the paint into the cracks and crevices on this particular model. So in this case, what I'm going to do is add water by dipping my brush into my water cup, and I'm going to gently mix this onto one side of the paint, keeping in mind which side I've mixed this to. So I know that this paint is now thinner and probably more willing to flow a lot better. And one thing you'll notice with paint like this is that the paint goes a lot further once it's been thinned down. So where I was struggling to paint that bolter with pure paint out the bottle, it took a couple of dips for me to keep building up just one surface of that gun. Adding water to it increased the flow rate of the paint. This made it spread much further and the coverage was a lot better. Not only that, but it fell into the cracks and grooves a lot easier than the paint straight out of the bottle. The ratio to thinning this is going to depend on what you want the paints to do. If you're wanting to do good coverage without brush strokes in your paint work, then you want to thin the paints to a level where you would do multiple coats in order to get to the full saturation of the color that you had placed down. Another really great way of thinning your paints, however can become slightly expensive over time, is to use an airbrush medium or a flow improver. And the way that I use this is by adding some to my palette, and I take it over to the paint and add it to the paint. What a flow improver does is it improves the flow of the paint, making the paint move a lot better on the model. The other thing that it does is it doesn't break down the pigments inside the paint. It helps carry it over throughout the entire liquid, as opposed to breaking it up like water can tend to do. And what you'll see with a flow improver is that the paint tends to flow a lot better than what it did with just water. This is something we can use to our advantage in certain cases where we need the paint to come off in one stroke rather than multiple layers. What you will notice is that using water, the paint has taken longer to dry than the paint that I used the thinners with. This is because you are able to deposit a thinner layer of paint on the model than you are with water. Like I said, there is essentially a bonding relationship happening between the pigment and the liquid or carrier that the pigment is in. So knowing this knowledge, you can use this to your advantage. Water will help you spread your paints in the cases where you may not have a thinner, or you don't necessarily need a thinner to spread the paints further. But a flow improver or thinner, it will help you in instances where you need a lot more saturation on a much thinner coat of paint. Sometimes you need a thinner coat of paint when details are a lot more complicated and detailed. Whereas on a flat area or a big large surface, you may not need to thin your paint as much. What you can see in the video now is how thin that coat is versus how thick the coat of the gun is. And even the way that the paint itself looks. The paint looks chunky on the gun, as opposed to it looks like the chainsword was actually meant to be that color, whereas the gun looks like it has been painted. So using too thick of a paint, this is one of the biggest parts of brush control that you need to control long before we can start getting deeper into how to use the brush. Over the next couple of videos, I'm going to show you brush control techniques that will help improve your model painting. And I hope you stick around to see more of these in the future. If you found any information in that video that helped you or you may use in the future, please be sure to comment about it in the comment section below. Make sure to leave a like on the video and don't forget to subscribe so you can help to feed my social media ego. Also, don't forget that we have a Patreon. Joining the Patreon gives you access to my private Discord where we discuss painting tips, techniques, and things that may not be shown in the videos and may pop up in future videos. We already have an incredible group of people who paint like absolute magicians. So don't miss out and join the Patreon, meow. And as it's that time of the video, we all know there is only one thing left to do. Even though YouTube took away the dislike button, still click the dislike and f*** off. I had to use a whole new sheet of paper for my wet palette for that. They better bloody like it.